Buenas noches, everyone. I hope everybody's doing well, blessed, and enjoying family. As always, muchas gracias to everyone for everyone's words, wishes, prayers, as the love and support everyone shares and sends my way. From the heart, thank you. Also, do please like, share, subscribe, and hype to the message. Gracias. Well, everyone, today I got two things I wanted to share with you, you know, and it's up and down. I haven't decided, but I think in this one I'm gonna make it a story time, and then look on how it used to be when the shoes weren't around. For those that I know, there's no more downtime, and that's a good thing. But at least in my experience, how it was, every time I hit a shoe, more than anything, a different one, right? But first and foremost, I want to take you back to Quentin, right? All the way from reception, for numerous of things I hit, Overflow East Block, Carson, for that's where they kept us for the whole, right? And I'm as I moved on from San Quentin, I really thought the sales they weren't gonna be worse. It was just small, and you got to Carson and stuff. You were blocked in. It was just it's an old pinta. But I remember when I got to Tracy, right, and the cells, excuse me, are beat in. No windows, no, three tiers, but still the cells were a little bit bigger, but they were beat up. And I don't know if it was because it was reception or where we did our reds to go to committee, or I don't know what it was, right? But the cells, man. And then when I went to the hall, it was, you know. But the reason why I'm telling you all this is because this would eventually prepare me, right? That's why I think I didn't have that. I'm not gonna say fear, but the anxiety. When I was hitting a shoe. From there, I would end up visiting Solano's hole, Backerville's hole, and Backerville. To be sincere, that's a nice hole. I know it used to be a shoe, but I was on the top tier. There's a window in front of your cell bars, and you could see Solano go off whenever it did, right? The yard is cool, you go out, go down the side of the building, you go in your yard, and Vacaville had a pretty cool hole. And then Ironwood, in Ironwood, I did a lot of hole time, and I never was that one that I went back and forth. I did put or did a few movidas on A yard, as people that come on have mentioned it. I like to be fair and just things that camaradas should not be involved because they had a political angle. I would rather handle it myself, right, than put a homie in the spot. But I would get busted for that pegada and güero, and you know, I was ordered to not just hit him, but make it a point, right? Because there was dislike there from Terco and Boxer, you know, And this is before Boxer had decided to go out butt first, you know. And anyways, and all the pintas before here is I been is I done more whole time than yard time besides Ironwood, right? And Ironwood I did like 9 months back there in the hole, and then I would get shipped to Tehachapi shoe to serve my shoe. That's why when I got to Tehachapi, I didn't have that much shoe left, you know. I believe I had, if I'm not mistaken, like 8 months, 9 months left, something to that effect, right? But that's when the anxiety did hit, you know. The the thing is, in Ironwood, I had already met Billy's. I had a Sally already from that was a Billy, and but you know, at all times you always hear, you know, every individual is their own mind. They run their own program. You never know which casa you're gonna run into, right? Or more than anything, what character you're gonna run into, you know, his way of thought, his way of handling things like that. That brought anxiety to me. I remember hitting Tehachapi, and right away they, you know, from R&R, they would end up taking us up to B Yard, and we went in 7 block. They put us in this dog cages that's right there, literally by the door, and everything was silent, you know. Coming from Ironwood, it's loud. I mean, loud. Ironwood's loud, right? In the hole, right there was silent. You know, it's literally 10 cells. You know, on one side, it's like upstairs. There's 10. There's five down, five. Then there's a small day room, and it goes kind of like a B shape. And then there's the other five downstairs. Another five showers in front of both cells, and that was basically the 180 design, right? It was just converted into a shoe. Now, when you went into sales, though, man, Tehachapi was love. There were huge sales. Your window went from the ground up. You could see out. When it snowed, you could see the snow. I remember one day we just looking out at the snow. We caught a puma out there walking, and that was a talk for months, you know. And the doors are solid, though. So, again, there ain't too much noise. But I remember getting in there, and once the Judas left, then that's when Creeper was the one to address me, right? Hey, you're a camarada, you know, a sureño. And I told him, Simon. He asked me what cell I was going to. And then I told him I was going to 1-1, right? Which was right underneath them. And he said, all right, well, basically all that, you know, you have your papiros on you. And I told him, yeah, todo bien, I have that on me. And where I'm coming from, and just things like that. And then he's like, I want to introduce you to the señor, and that's when Toro came on the tier, and bienvenidos and the greetings of getting there, and you know, I got in the cell. First thing I shot my paperwork to Snoopy from 18 was the one that when he was a camarada, he shot his line to send it to him, you know. And him and Chino would read it and then pass on to T, right? And Creeper, and everything good, you know. Within half hour, todo bien. I was already on roll call and everything, you know. At the end, you know, they were asking me, the questions came, what happened on the yard. I know you were for tea there, and I told him, well, tú sabes, you know, this cat boxer had a nephew supposedly had us blessings to take over the yard, and I did my homework. He wasn't taking nothing. First off, just off the bat, just 'cause he said so. I verified, and it came back that Nachales, dale gas, and that's the issue that ended up taking me to the hole in here, and that's when I was told the first time, nah, no, don't worry. Remember, this is 2001, right? Don't worry, that cat's out the door. Any moment now, he's out the door one way or another. And, you know, as time would tell, T was right, Within months, he had uh, he had done the walk of shame, right? And started his walk as an officer. And, anyways, getting back to the shoe, it was nothing but love. 7 block B section, it was mostly all camaradas, Every cell, there was woods underneath, or where we were at the same tier, down the tier, like 2 cells away. And then there was some bloods upstairs, but on the other side of the day room. And other than that, it was just all homies, right? And mostly everybody was validated. There was only a few of us in that block that weren't, that went out to the concrete yard, And it was feeling me as though, issues up, bros, just like any other place. I know I haven't put on here the story where, you know, I got a celly from Rivera, and he was coming from the bay and had some cola behind him, He had an issue coming, but it wasn't like he was through, where I would have taken care of it on the spot, right? It was more like a checada. And anyways, that's for a different story. You know, Getting back to the shoe, it was nothing but love. Sincerely, in Tehachapi, it was nothing but love, Ocupas esto, did you make it a canteen? And this, nothing but respect, I didn't really run across norteños right there, right? They were in a C section and B section, but right in that section, there weren't none, But I did get school, by Toro and, all that we get taught, Whenever we have a kitty, if you're responsible, llega NF, NR, norteño, lo que sea, son gente, son raza. They get a kitty just like anybody else, and let them know, hey, aquí te va, our respect, you know, and you're not to accept nothing back from them, period. And it wasn't like in a bad way. It was, well, I got taught there by T, it's like, if they tell you, hey, I'll get you back, it'd be like, nah, no worries. There's somewhere else in the shoe where there's a homie driving up, and believe me, the norteño gente is looking out for him. So it all meets at the end, right? So it is how it is back here. Well, you guys know how Tehachapi would end up unfolding for me, and I would hit Corcoran. Corcoran, I was more ancient because, there was many stories about Corcoran, and not just with the Juras, but I knew the misunderstandings that were happening between Terco and Artie, and I assisted Terco with a yard, and even though on that yard we never had conflict with Artie, he had people, but they were running B yard, B or C yard, which was silent from King Cobras, and I know his whole crew got whacked there. So, but that had nothing to do with me, right? And like I said, when I got there, it was completely different, right? First off, you get in, they direct me when I first got there, I went to four left, and at the moment when I got there, they were still walking you to your cell, You go, you go in the rotunda, they walk you. They got little cells outside. Usually that's for haircuts, clippers, or whatever, right? They open the door and then all the cells are in front of you, direct. All the cells. I forgot if I believe there's 11 or 12 cells per section. And then two showers, one upstairs down, and there's a big space in the day room, right? It's big. It wasn't like Tehachapi where all you seen in front was a wall, the shower, and maybe the day room a little bit if you were in that angle. Other than that, there was nothing there, right? Corcoran did have it, to look forward to. They opened that door, you could literally see everything, right? The doors were penetrated by holes. And yeah, Corcoran had that funny way. I don't know if they still do, that you get there and the Judas, they want to play that scaring tactics, right? And you get there and they tell you, don't look at me, don't look down, look up, and pay attention. And all this that they're woofing. Well, at least I knew they were woofing, but at the same time, you don't want to start going against them from the beginning. So you look up, straight up, you're going to look up just to avoid conflict, right? They would end up taking me there in the section I was in. I was in C section. There was a bunch of camaradas. There was a bunch of norteño gente. You know, there was a couple woods, and I don't believe there was any brothers in that section. Because I remember the roll calls. It was always the wood pile passed it on to us, and then us to the norteños, or vice versa. But it was always respectful on the tier, right, amongst us, and it's basically when I got in touch with B Yard, and it was due to Weddle that had that building, right? And then I would be given responsibilities. And I don't really talk about, that I had a celly that was from Pokeway, right there in C section, San Jose, and it just became an issue, right? I mean, in the sense where Homeboy just had one of them stilos that did not meet with mine. First off, he was dirty, and I wasn't going to be someone's cha-cha, right? And I like to have my cell clean, though, bathroom clean, you know, out of respect, if you use the toilet right away, you clean it, you start, and then just for the next man, right? And all that he wasn't in agreement with. And it just became a point where, well, it was me. I told him, hey, homie, tienes clecha? And he said, yeah, why? And then I started telling him, like, look, this, and that. We're in the cell. We're not winos in the cells, homie. In the cell, we keep this cell clean. and out of respect. And he says, you know, I respect you because he was respectful in many ways, right, to me. But I took that as disrespect too, you know. And I told him, this is just respect, though, homie. You know, I do it for you, but you can't do it for me. And, you know, just little things like that started happening to the point where he tried to be wild on the tier. And I told him, you know, when you get on the tiers with respect. And, you know, I learned from Tio Chino and many issues, I guess. It got to the point where he just couldn't be sellies, right? Couldn't be sellies. And I had to address it with Güero. And Güero said, handle it. Handle it as long as you both get sprayed, pull out, nobody cries wolf on the tier, boogie. You're in that right to take off on him. And it ain't enough grounds to put him on any lista, so just handle it. So the minute I'd read that, he was on his bunk, right? And I took he he also didn't like to wear shoes in the cell, and that was a no, right? I knew better. The locks were unlocked. You had to keep your shoes on. So I told my homie, "Párate, put your shoes on." And he goes, "Why? What's up?" And I told him, you know, hey, we're gonna knuckle up, homie. And he's like, "Nah, it's that serious. Yeah, it's that serious, homie. You know, I ain't your jefito, homie. I ain't this, and that to be chasing after you. You taking it as a joke, and I don't know where you think you're at, right?" I had this mentality. I was never one of them, you know, just because I'm a double life for this, and that. Nah, it wasn't about that. You know, I wasn't going to stay in living with a wino, you know. And the only way to get a cell move at this point was that, you know. So, anyways, the homie, yeah, he got down, put his shoes on, and he bucked up, and we boogied. We boogied all the way to the point where the SEALs came to the door. They sprayed us, got us out. Hey, what happened? Nothing. What you mean nothing? Nothing. But look at you guys, and we caught you doing this, and then you know what happened. You know, there's no need for me to state it, and we left it at that, right? They would end up moving me to Fort Wright, and that's when everything started. You know, I got familiar with everyone. Artist Wheeler came back, and this is your responsibility. Assist me with this, and I was surprised, to be sincere. And I try to have a direct communication with every building, right? And present it to B Yard whenever I had the chance. And it was like that, you know. There was a lot of rumors though, you know, about B Yard. Que son más acá y allá, more high power, you gotta be trucha and anything you speak. I had already been given this clecha by Raul, right? When you're around a camarada trying to earn his points, don't trust him. Don't say nothing that could be used against you. It's just basically, even if you know you're right, just giving his way. Oh, Simon, yeah, I didn't know that, homie, you're right. You know, that type of thing. It's just better play possum than start a conflict, you know, that was going to be met with a different reaction on BR. So when I got validated again, I was suspecting a whole different thing on BR, you know, and it was nothing like that. You know, I got to three right, and again there was Norteños, Woods, Camaradas, Artie was in there, and you would think it would be quiet, right? But nah, Charles, it was loud. Most of the camaradas are on tweak. Meantime, and that was happening on AR too, right? But you would think among senores it was not permitted because, as far as I always knew, it was against the rules for us to use tweak. But since it was the thing coming in the most, everybody was on that thing, right? And it's facts, on tweak, and a lot of things happen that should not happen, you know. And it was all due to the habit, people getting sprung out and they see monitos con trinchetes and then they want to take off on their celly or go out to medical and then tell the Hura I can't come back because they're after me when they ain't nobody even speaking on them, right? But anyways, like I said before, I had issues with the celly. I would do a video, on the cellies I had that we had little conflicts, but I would end up selling with Night Out from King Cobras, Raul Leiva, right? Ruben Leiva, excuse me. And everything was females. I ain't gonna lie to you. I got nothing negative to say about Raul. He was a good individual. He had been made many years before I think I came in the system, right? But he was a good dude, you know, in many ways. I was going through my cancer. He was supportive. And I say this just to show the type of individual I was, right? Because jealousy hit between him and Artie. And then Artie just said, "Hey, Chino, pick up the line." And there's a one time. And I did. And night I was out of medical. And basically it was like, "Hey, homie, I need a favor." And, the whole cha cha. Homeboy right here, he's been on one. He hasn't been doing nothing. He's just taking space. I need you to go ahead and pull his card, but all the way. I don't want no halfway things and allow someone else to go speak to the squad, right? And I'm gonna be honest with you, it was real clear. It was all jealous because they were both from Pilis from King Cobras, you know. But it was true. Nairo was going through his thing with his wife because he was a lifer that just couldn't handle it no more, and it was all going through back and forth on mail. So I already told her, I would do my thing and would end up finish drinking and laying down on the beds. The beds are side by side, and he was up on the fan, and I kept drinking to the point I passed out right on the floor, right next to the bed till I heard the alarm in the morning. And from I don't know what happened. We drank, and they never took me out of that, right? So it was considered like while we were drinking, I passed out, and he did his thing, right? Which is at least that's what the DA said, but the prison is a whole different cha-cha. They file judgment through their own sergeants and lieutenants and committees, so they would end up sending me a one-way ticket to Pelican Bay, and for a long time it was the Mecca, right? That's where we had to end up to really be around senores. Even though in Corcoran there was a lot of senores. We're speaking from Marty to Mike, Wino before he went no good, Fox, uh, Joker was there at one time, Fernie. There was numerous Pilis there in BR, right? but a lot of them were there on the medical thing. They were gonna get back to Corcoran, right? And to Pelican Bay, excuse me. Now, when you go up to Pelican Bay, the first thing you notice is everything's green, right? It's nature, right? Nature's always been attractive to me, and I heard about the weather from many individuals that had came down from the bay to Corcoran while I was there, and basically they told me how it should be, right? How it's going to be received, and Pelican Bay's different, you know. For some reason, Corcoran didn't have that stench to it. Tehachapi didn't have that stench to it. But you went into the hallways right away, you get a stench of I don't know if it's desperation or I don't know how to explain it, right? But the first play I would end up is in D3, and there was a couple salas of camaradas, you know, and a Billy from San Diego that recently got hit, right? And other than that, it was just all norteño gente. And actually, my neighbors both they were norteños, and right away they shot me a care package, right? And I was due to get an annual package on the shoe, right? And the canteen, and my thoughts was to get everybody back, you know. The norteño from San Jose on one side, and then I had a cast from Stockton on the other end, and they looked out, you know, with books, magazines, and they were like, "Look, we're done with this. We're just making a way pile with this. So go ahead, you know, that's all you." Again, it was nothing but love and respect. I got to a point where I got along real good, you know, with individuals because I was there maybe the first 2 years. That's how I don't know if you guys go back to my story. The first ones we started doing things with the San Diego faction due to Carlos, right? And everything was Firmes. I just don't know what happened, you know. A homie from oh, he was from Rivera, yeah, Pico Nuevo, excuse me, you know. And the homie they cracked his door, and there was already the door policy in place, you know. But I don't know what happened, you know. There was a misunderstanding. One said he thought the other one was rushing one, and anyways, they got him up with fierros, you know. And it's a small passageway, you know. There is just four cells on the bottom and four on top, the showers, and literally what 2 meters and just a wall, nothing there to see, right? And but due to that conflict, they started flip flopping us around, you know, and it was females where I was at. But then, you know, they had a little thing at the moment. I don't know if those remember that when we were out there, they didn't want us to get used to the peelies, you know. For example, you be here for a year, 2 years with the numerous appeals, right? And then all of a sudden they start doing all these flip flops, you know, moving people around because they didn't want the angle of you maybe hitting the yard again with a whole bunch of directions or the streets or whatever. I don't know the reasons, right? But I would end up on Seaside, right? And On Seaside, it was the section was all. There was two sales of camaradas. The rest were Pilis, you know. I was literally in the next pot as Turtle, Danny, um, Boxer was out there. Well, there was numerous of camaradas just behind me, you know, and then Billy's. Same over here, you know, there was an NF member, a Norteño, and then the rest, it was like three Billies and homies, right? But again, it's all respect. It's all respect. For example, my neighbor, right? They would see me get mail and see I got magazines or whatever, and he would hit my wall and tell me, "Hey, Chino, I seen you got magazines. Whenever you get through with them, let me peep through them," which was in the norm, right? You finish the magazines and you push it to the next cell and peep through them and please pass on to the next cell. And it was all respect, you know. It went down the tier and everybody understood it had to take its path, you know. But definitely, the one thing I want to say, you know, Pelican Bay wasn't what everybody thought, you know. It was real quiet, real respectful. There's a lot of things that were moving from their point, like yards on the streets. But to me personally, the worst show I was in was Corcoran. There's a lot of politics going on, a lot of politics, a lot of homies getting hit, you know, over. You know, I'm glad I left to the Bay when Artie was kicking off hard with that. Oh, hey, Chino, that fool did something wrong. Go ahead and clip him for $500 or a favor. And since we had Celis and Corcoran, it was always bad, right? Pelican Bay was your single cell. There ain't too many people in the pot. Most of the time, you're not gonna move unless someone from the higher ups requests it to someone that does the favor or something big happens. But that was my case. I went from D yard or D side to C side, and then from C side is where I would end up going back to county, overturning the case under a technicality. Came back for about another year or so, because even though they overturned it, I still had that charge, right, of the bulldog I did when they opened our doors in Corcoran. And so I did that time. I was supposed to be let out in Cali, and it just didn't work like that. Feds picked me up and they took me to the feds. Like I say, there's always people speaking. There's always people speaking, and the squad's always aware of what you're doing. First and foremost, I was more disillusioned with Billy's when I hit Pelican Bay than I was in Corcoran. Corcoran, it was one man really running everything, and B Yard, of course, you tend to do things with different Billies, and it's respected, but at the same time, you have to go through the proper guidelines, even them, because already had the antiquity on that yard, and like for rolling them, it was difficult. But it wasn't like Pelican Bay, each peely has his program, his mindset, how you're going to do things. There's some pilis that say F the next man. There's some that are really like, nah, let's carnalismo, let's do this together. And, you as a camarada is just up and down, right? But, anyways, this is just was a story, right? On how my path through the three shoes were. I don't know if I was already beat into that type because I did so much whole time, but besides society, it was what it was. For example, moving from Tehachapi shoe to Corcoran shoe, it was a big change in sales, how the sales were, the doors, the pods, the politics. So when I hit the Bay, it was like just there's another big change coming. But definitely the Bay used to let you down, and mainly because I seen a lot of BS in the Bay. There was a lot of camaradas that been back there for 10, 15 years with them, 20. And let's say they move that Billy that he's been with for that long in that section and bring in a different one in that section, different mindset with the grudge to the next Billy. Next thing you know, it's like, hey, this fool ain't to be considered a camarada. If you can get him. And I feel it was right. Their pedals is their pedals. It did not have to end with you taking somebody that's good with that in that carnal of yours just to get at your carnal and throw away someone that been holding it solid. There was many issues like that, right? The ones I didn't really see a lot of conflict up there was really with the norteños. There was, I could tell you many, right, from the outside looking in, but other than that, they tried to keep it disciplined. You know, it was a lot more quiet than other spots. For example, Corcoran, they still did their machina on the tier, and vice versa, right? Whenever we have here, we did our routine inside, and let's just say it just wasn't respectful for neither one. As in many shoes. Tehachapi worked different. And for example, they used to take us out. They take us out to both yards, and you go in the rotunda. One side in B section was us. We weren't validated yet. The other yard was all the individuals, Toro, Creeper, the Peelies, and then they were validated. And then after it was like the woods. One side the NLRs and who they were with, and then the skinheads, and whenever they mixed them, it was on. And then the other ones were the norteños, the brothers, the others was going out with them, and I guess what I'm trying to say is neither shoe was painted the way that it was pushed on the yards, right? That's why I always push for don't buy it into things. Prison is prison. The best advice I could give you is just be ready to blend into whatever the program comes because it comes in many forms. But at the end of the day, the message is not even to have to go to prison. Do your thing the way you're supposed to. And even if you go to prison, get out and solid, whatever, and concentrate on you. Whatever that has to mean, work wise, family wise, kids. But always remember, stay true to yourself and loyal to your loved ones. I hope this was interesting enough, I just wanted to share with you my experience as I arrived in all three shoes, right? Buenas noches.